Hi, it's Brian from 4W Drive Magazine. Today we're installing a Rancho 2.5-inch leveling kit on our 2016 Ram 1-ton truck. It's a basic install, and so we're hoping to get this done in a couple hours. First step is to jack the truck up and make sure you have some good jack stands underneath the frame. Second step in the installation process, once we have gotten the truck down onto the jack stands safely, is to remove the sway bar. The sway bar is connected. We're obviously not going to be able to get everything down to be able to get our springs out. It's time to get some spray lube on a couple of the brackets that we're going to have to remove. We need to drop all the suspension down, which means that we need to possibly extend our brake lines a little farther than they would normally like to go.
Quite impressed we read directions.
Hey, I'm right here. Just like that. There's part of it. Now we need this, believe it or not, is about the only part we're actually not going to reuse. We got a new set of Rancho RS 9000s to go into this truck. From the factory, you can see these little clips that are on the wheels here. They're used to hold the rotor in position before the caliper was put on when the truck was being built. For our purposes, we don't need these anymore. We're going to put on a set of AEV aftermarket wheels, so these have to come off. So here's one of the clips that we just pulled off of that wheel that hold the rotor on when the truck was in production. The reason we have to get rid of these is they fit nicely behind the factory wheel. There's plenty of clearance here. And even on our AEV wheels, they're already back cut for this to sit in there. But most aftermarket wheels have a flush back to the wheel, which means that is going to act as a tiny spacer that will eventually ruin the studs, ruin your wheel, and ruin your day. Step 3 in our process is going to be actually lowering the front suspension out of the truck so that we can pull our coil spring out. Try and do one side at a time, because if you can cantilever the axle, then it'll be easier to get one side out and then the other. So when you pull out your coil spring, make sure you keep the orientation right. You don't want to end up sticking this thing in upside down. Not that it makes a big deal, but you want to try to avoid that if you can. Get everything back the way that it came out. All we're really doing is adding this spacer up into our coil bucket. Now you got to remember to take your coil isolator out so that you don't get a metal clang. This bucket is what actually produces our lift. All we're doing is removing the spring down from the chassis to give us that lift. So this distance right here is the amount of lift that we are going to get out of this kit. So our next job will be to install the bucket up into the top and bolt it into place loosely. Our passenger side and our driver's side bracketry mounts are different on this Dodge. The coil buckets themselves are exactly the same, driver to passenger side, but we need different hardware because there's your ABS pump up in above the coil bucket. So there's no way to reach the hardware on the passenger side the same way that it is on the driver's side. Sounds like something nitpicky, but flat washers do have a direction. If you look at the rounded edges on here, this faces out. So this is the way your hardware is going to go. The reason for that is this under edge has a sharp lip there that'll help hold the flat washer into place. Trying to get these coil isolators back into place. They are indexed, and they're indexed off a little hole that's mounted right inside the coil bucket. It's already pre-drilled. I've found in the past the easiest way to get these indexing tabs in there is with a little bit of window cleaner. Like that. I'm gonna go ahead and put our coil spring back in. Careful of all the lines. Make sure it's indexed properly. When I talk about indexing the coil spring, what I mean is I want the end of this coil spring to push right against there. If it's twisted in there, it's going to cause a lift, and it's going to cause the spring to eventually twist, which could cause damage to these isolators. It helps to have a buddy with a couple extra pounds on them to help put some weight on the axle so you can get it in. We are in place. Our shocks that we're putting in with our leveling kit in the front of our Ram are RS 9000 XLs. Now these are the adjustable ones that you can get. These are great for a vehicle that will carry different loads in it over time. Jason, the truck's owner, has excavators he hauls, campers, and trips to the grocery store as well. So being able to adjust your shocks for those varying loads vastly improve the ride of your vehicle. Rancho also sells a kit where you can unbolt this, put an adapter in, and you can actually adjust your shocks from inside the cab of your vehicle. Getting ready to put our shocks in. For hydro shocks like this, these are not nitrogen charged, so you can see they're a lot easier to install and they work rather well. We're going to end up installing our tops first. And these bushings that we have, they do go one way. A lot of people just fire them in there any way that they can, but you want this larger end here to fit inside the hole that's there for it so that they don't wobble around once the truck's out on the highway. Putting the shock boot on, there's a lot of different theories about whether you need them or not, or whether you should put them on or leave them off. Living in Canada, I firmly believe that you should have the boot on, but if you don't tie wrap it at the bottom, just so that any moisture that does get in there is able to drain out, I think that's a good thing for the longevity of the shock rod. When you're installing your shock and you get your bottom shock bolt ready to go in, just look and make sure that your dial is facing out so you can actually reach it to adjust your shocks. Try and put some never sees on your bolts when you're putting them back in. You know the factory didn't, and once you pull them out, they're going to start rusting. What we're doing is just putting our brake lines back into place now that everything is in there. And they don't need to be super tight, otherwise you will strip the brackets, but you can now put them back into place because your shock will now limit the total amount of down travel. So we're just getting ready to put our sway bar drop brackets in. You reuse the original hardware. Again, make sure to use some never sees on them. And there is a left and a right bracket. Now, the bracket will slope forward towards the front of the truck, so you want to make sure that you don't get them mixed up side for side. The other easy way to tell is the frame is tilted that way. Your Rancho sign will be nice and level. So some people might think it's kind of funny that we're putting adjustable front shocks on this truck because the weight never changes on the front of the truck. That's not necessarily true. If you have a load equalizing hitch or a gooseneck, you're actually putting a lot of different loads to transfer them to the front of the truck. So for those heavier loads, you're going to want to crank up your shocks so that you don't get that wallowing ride as you're going over bumpy roads. So these 3/4 and 1 ton Dodge trucks, as well as the Fords, have a radius arm, which means that there is one arm attached to the frame that attaches to our axle, and this controls our caster back and forth. So what this does is this allows a proper return to center feel when you're going down the highway and you finish making a corner, you let go of the steering wheel and it comes back. Once we've lifted the truck like we have today, we need to correct that. Luckily, Rancho gives us all our instructions on what we need to do. And what we really need to make happen is we need to make this cam bolt right here make a quarter turn, right to about there. The way to do that is to loosen this big nut here, and then on the back there's a bolt. We have to turn that to get it into position. Now that we got everything back together on our truck, we got our wheels and tires back on and in place. We got our Bushwhacker fender flares on now to protect everything and give us that a little bit extra coverage so that the tire's not spitting rocks and dirt. So check out more reviews, installs, and places that we've been at 4W Drive Canada at suncruisermedia.com. This is Brian Irons. We'll catch you next time.